Let's crack open a beer and share some thoughts.
Welcome to this Hopinions special where we're looking back over 20 years of Fyne Ales, Martin, aren't we?
Yes, I was only in my early 30s when Fyne Ales kicked off, Steve. But we're not alone. We do have a special guest, and it's Jamie Delap from Fyne Ales. Welcome to the show.
Hey, welcome, guys. Thanks so much for having us on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us, Jamie. It is a pleasure to have you with us. Now, just for our listeners, what is your role at Fyne Ales?
Oh, Lord. So I suppose I kind of land up doing everything that no one else does. But yeah, no, basically, my parents started the brewery back 20 years ago. And when Dad died, which is now just over, 12 years ago, 12 and a bit years ago, someone needed to, either me or my brother needed to get involved and work out what we were going to do and how we're going to sort it out. And at that stage, Mum had been involved, but it was very much helping her to sort of work out where we took the brewery to next. So I kind of got my sleeves rolled up and stuck in, and so I've really spent the last 12 and a half years in beer. So I don't know what you want to call me, managing director, owner. A bit of a mixture, whatever I can do.
No, that's good. And 12 and a half years soaked in beer doesn't sound so bad from the outside, to be honest.
No, I would say it was pretty damn good. I think that was probably one of the deciding factors. I think my last business was a much less enjoyable part of industry, shall we say. It was good. There were lots of things I loved about it, lots of things that were good fun. But then you find yourself making beer and selling beer, and you're like, okay, this could be good. Actually, we could do something here. This is something that we could really actually have some fun with and really take somewhere and do something with.
Okay, well, before we get too much into the family history and the business side of it, we have already opened the first beer. It is sitting in front of me. It's a 500 milliliter bottle, listeners.
Remember those?
I'm sort of ready to dive in, but perhaps, Jamie, you should probably tell us what we're having.
Okay, so we're starting actually with the very first beer that we brewed back in 2001 when we started. And very much as I said, this business was started by my parents. We've had a farm up here for 100+ years, but this was the beer that we decided. So I'm going to jump back. I'll go back to the beer. This was the beer we started with. So it was my dad's favourite beer. I remember when we were living down south before they moved up here permanently, was HSB from Gales, Hampshire Special Brew, which was good, solid, classic, well-made English bitter. And up here on the west coast of Scotland, you were really lucky if you found a pint of Duker's IPA or Belhaven 80 shilling. That was as good as you were going to get. And frankly, they weren't great, and they often weren't served in great condition. So what Dad really wanted to do was to produce a beer that he really wanted to drink. And being a man who was never shy of, as I remember it, of a can of Tennant's Super Lager or Carlsberg Special, he certainly wasn't shy of pushing up what was, in those days, 4.8% was considered a relatively strong beer. So he wanted to produce a relatively strong, good, solid bitter. And that was really where Highlander came from. And also, up here in Scotland, something where at that stage, 2001, it was not all about the hops. It was about, good, solid drinkability. So it was very much a malt-forward beer. And I think when you drink this, you're going to get a lot of that sort of the notes from the crystal malt that we use coming through, that sort of malty sweetness. And this one's married up with Solea, which is a nice Slovenian hop, which we think just marries in nicely. And of the beers that we started with, this is the only one where the recipe has basically stayed untouched since that first brew that we did with it. Yeah, I'm sure there will have been a few little trims and tweaks along the way, but the malt bill's the same, the hop bill's the same, the basic processing's the same, and it's all sort of built forward from there.
I don't know about you, Steve, but if we don't get into this soon, I might cry.
Yeah, from that description, my mouth's watering. It's the sort of beer that I'm really craving at the moment as well. Thanks for that introduction, Jamie. Cheers.
Pleasure. Cheers, guys.
You do really get like a creamy caramel and initially coming through, and then that just gives way to this real subtle earthiness, and then behind that is just this bitterness that underpins the whole drink, and it's one of those that makes you want to go back in for another sip just to make sure you've tasted everything that you just tasted.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Steve. I think that the bitterness really does sort of back everything up that goes beforehand. I can definitely see the sort of HSB influence behind it, because I do think you described it very accurately. It is a really good, solid example of an English bitter, and I can definitely see where the inspiration comes from. This probably feels a little bit more almost fruitier. And I don't know if that comes from the hops you were talking about from Slovenia.
Exactly. We're looking. I think we were very much looking for that slightly fruitier note, that slightly more interesting. And I think, although the recipe has stayed the same, I think we've probably been selecting for hops which are giving it a slightly fruitier profile over time, because everything's got to have its. I think when you're thinking beers, I always think you're not thinking about one flavour. You've kind of got like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the flavour of a good beer sort of has to evolve and roll in your mouth as you go. So I think the trick for any good long drinking beer, sort of sessionable beer, is that long, slow bitterness at the end. But you also want it to begin sort of, this one I think begins with quite a lot of that malt up front, and then you've kind of got that sort of fruity note you go through, and then you dry out to that bitterness at the end. And I think it's important that beer has that sort of evolution in the mouth.
Yeah, talking of evolution, this is a real interesting one for me, because this is first beer that Fyne brewed 20 years ago in 2001, and it's an amber. And it's stood the test of time over 20 years, where I think there are many breweries that would have rapidly dropped this sort of style as tastes changed in the last few years. But yet you've stuck with it, and this is still a beer that sits within your core range. Have you seen the demand for this reduce, or is there still as much demand for this beer as there's always been?
Oh, so certainly compared with when we started, there's way more demand for this beer than there ever was back in 2001. Just because, in 2001 we were ploughing barren fields, and it took time. But no, I mean this has been constantly available ever since we started. This is a beer that's been on the stock lists, at least intended to be on the stock lists, give or take stock outs, but it's always been intended to be available absolutely year round since the beginning. So no, I would say more that everything else has grown faster. But I would say we had a much more one of our core range beers. We did Bramling Cross, which was much more an absolute classic British bitter. And actually, post-pandemic, we've not brought that back as part of the core range. I think, to be honest, because there's a lot of good, very well-made British brown bitters out there. And up here in Scotland, there's not a huge market for them. So whereas this one, which hits more into that sort of 80 shilling pint of heavy sort of style that we have up here, has always stood the test of time.
Obviously, we're having it in a 500 milliliter bottle tonight. Presumably it was when you did your dad did this recipe 20 odd years ago, he was picturing drinking it presumably as a cask beer.
Absolutely. Yeah. When we started, it was 100% cask. So yeah, we were very much, this was 2001 was the era of microbreweries. And the thing that was interesting up here in Scotland was that there really wasn't much real ale around. And so, there certainly were. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were people up here that started well before us. But nevertheless, it was not common to find good small brewery produced cask beer. So from the get-go, we were sort of conceived as a classic British cask beer brewery. That was our essence. That's where we began from.
I think this actually has the softness of a cask beer. It really does, and
the conditioning is excellent, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah. I mean, I'm getting lacing in my glass, and any beer that I can get lacing from at home, I'm very, very happy with. In terms of the conditioning.
Yeah. We do use a bit of torrefied wheat in the recipe, which really helps with the extra protein for that head retention. So it's every beer's got to look right, it's got to look good, it's got to look true to style. So so we're not going for a big Belgian beer, sort of big white foamy head, but we do want a bit of a head on it. We do want it to sort of have that bit of lacing through the glass. Yeah, mine's got a nice bit of lacing coming down the way as well.
While we're enjoying this, tell us the history of Fyne Ales. Then you mentioned a couple of times that it was a family business, and that it goes back in a few years in terms of the land ownership. But explain to us how the brewery came about and how it's gradually grown, maybe in those first 10 years or so of its existence.
So very much, my family's had the sort of the farm up here for pretty much now 120 years. We've always had a lot up here, and you go back to sort of when I was growing up, which is, let's face it, 40, 50 years ago. But a good 40 odd years ago. But actually, probably even if you went back, the heyday of the farm back sort of 60 years ago, we'd have employed like 20, 30 shepherds with their dogs, with families. There was lots going on. But, over time, the nature of farming has changed fundamentally. You now use far less buildings, far less people, where before you'd maybe have like 5 shepherds and teams of dogs in order to gather in a hillside. Well, now, nobody runs sheep actually on the hills up in this part of the world. It just can't do it economically. And now we really have one farm manager who runs the farm, does everything, feeds the animals, looks after them all year round. So as the farms evolved, I think we got to a stage where we had sort of unused buildings, and there was just a feeling that, we weren't bringing the amount of life and energy in the glen. We sit here really right at the head of Loch Fyne in a beautiful sort of classic U-shaped valley, proper sort of glacier-formed valley. But, the amount of life and energy in the glen had been sort of declining over the years. So pretty much, Dad had made most of his career down south working for a big Nestle, big food producer. But when he retired, they wanted to move back up here permanently, and they really wanted to think of ways to how do we actually bring more energy, more life back into the glen. And we had at that stage a disused dairy, didn't even have a roof on it, and with lots of ideas bouncing around. Okay, what are we going to do that's different? How are we going to actually bring something back, some energy back into the thing? And at the same time, let's be honest, Dad moving back up here, Dad very much liked his beer and was like, well, if we're going to move back up here and I can't get good beer locally, why don't we brew some good beer and see if we can persuade the local pubs to stock it? So that was kind of where the story began from. It was just like, we've kind of got this fantastic place, this beautiful location. We need to do something. And, up here in Argyll, still today, there's a real problem with depopulation, with young people moving away, houses converting to either holiday houses or maybe people retired coming up. But, the village and the school, that stopped years ago. But, we went from a sort of having sort of 40, 50, 60 kids in it to having no one, and then to everyone having to get the bus down to Dunoon in order to get to school. So it was really part of this. How do we bring energy and enthusiasm back to our part of the Highlands? And so that I think was a big part of the Genesis story. And then just, food and drink. And, I also have a cousin that started Loch Fyne Oysters, which is just like a stone's throw away. So a lot of your listeners might know the Loch Fyne restaurants that you see around the UK. And so they're literally just a stone's throw down the glen. And they... I remember Johnny began that just literally from a garden shed beside the road, selling shucked oysters. And, they've sort of steadily built out and grown. So I think there was also a feeling, actually, what, food and drink businesses up here can work. So it was sort of a mixture of different motivations, but very much initially, let's take that old dairy, let's convert it into a brewery, let's brew some beers that we want to drink, and let's see if we can persuade other people up here that they should drink good beer too.
So following on from that, how successfully did your dad manage to get some of those beers, say this one, the first one, Highlander, into the local pubs, considering that cask ale has a bit of a mixed reputation and following up in Scotland?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's kind of interesting, and that's also why we've been, really from the early days, there was a phase, I don't know if you remember, when it was all about locale. Camera ran big campaigns on locale, which was beer brewed within 20 miles of the pub. And that was always kind of hard for us because, frankly, there aren't a lot of pubs within 20 miles of us. So, and certainly pubs that could actually look after and manage real ale were really very few and far between. So, there were a couple of really good stalwarts, local pubs that took us on relatively early on because, they could, and it was an interesting product. But it kind of initially sold very much to the tourists. And, we are in a big touristy part of the world. Lots of nice folk coming up from England who would look for a local real ale and, there's something on the bar. So it kind of sold. But, even from the beginning, Edinburgh and then Newcastle was actually where we sold an awful lot of our beer. And I've got a copy somewhere of an old handwritten dray run that my mother used to hitch a trailer up to the back of the car, get guys to load it up with casks that be strapped on, and she'd drive over to Edinburgh, park up outside the pub, and then persuade the cellar managers or the manager on shift that they actually had to unload the trailer and get it down into the cellars. So it was really, it was just using the farm vehicles and farm trailer, tow it over to Edinburgh down to Newcastle, and do kind of what we had to do. We had to go a little bit further, try a little bit harder in order to get the beer out.
So, and you're going to have to forgive my ignorance, and I've read quite a few things about Fyne Ales and where you are. How far is that journey just to Edinburgh by car?
Well, Edinburgh is a good sort of 2.25 hour drive if you're not towing a trailer, probably close to 2 3/4 if you're towing a trailer, and Newcastle's a good couple of hours beyond that. So that's where your delivery journey is beginning.
It's quite a wide radius, because we often speak on the show about beers that Steve and I like from breweries who we consider north of where we are based in Essex, but they're probably still 5 hours to where we are. So you had to go 5 hours almost to get to your closest outlets.
Still today I have some I have a fantastic dray team, and we still deliver direct. We deliver direct up to Aberdeen, which is a good 4-hour drive away, and down to Newcastle, which is a 5-hour drive away. So the guys are setting off early in the morning, and they've got that kind of a drive before they do their first drop. So all these cushy breweries that are in sort of nice business parks on the edge of a city, and their dray guys are complaining about doing 2 delivery runs in a day. It's like they don't know how easy they've got it. I have a great team who work incredibly hard.
That's a real contrast to our conversation recently with Abbeydale, who can get their beers out to so many places in a very local area. So that's a real contrast, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah. I mean, as Martin said, I knew you were kind of up in the wilds, but I think when you put it into the context of how many minutes it takes to get to a place, that's when your eyes start to open a little bit and say, wow, you are really, really far up.
Yeah. To be fair, we're only about 1.25 hours north of Glasgow, but Glasgow back in the early days was a really difficult market for real ale. It's still, frankly, a very difficult market for real ale. So Edinburgh and Newcastle, we're always, and still do, we sell far more into those than we can into Glasgow.
You must be quite proud of the location that you're in, and with your family history going back so far in terms of the generations that farmed that land, to then bring it into the modern age, and you're now brewing off of the land, and I'm assuming you've repurposed some of the other bits as well to make them more profitable, so to speak. But it must be something that sits at the heart of what Fyne Ales do in terms of your provenance and the location.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, we are. It gives you a few different things. We're 100% a product. The business is a result of our location. Everything we do, the way we tackle problems, has to be based on where we are, because our equation is different. Our water supply is taken from the streams, we call them burns, that flow down the hill behind the brewery. So if it's raining today, that's the water we're brewing with tomorrow. We have our own. We have like a salmon river that runs through the middle of the glen, and Dad was a passionate fisherman. So we spent sort of the best part of 10, 15 years running a hatchery and restocking program on the river in order to try and encourage the wild salmon and to build the stock numbers back up. So therefore, the level we've got no mains drainage anywhere within 10 miles of us. So in order to treat that long further than that, I don't even know where the nearest point where we would find an effluent treatment plant we could tie into, but it would cost us millions. So we therefore have to put our own effluent treatment plant in place in order to treat the water to a really high standard. So when it goes out into the salmon river, it's not going to damage anything that's there. We are absolutely a product of sort of the place that we're in. And at the same time, our reason for being here is because actually people have come up and visit us. It's a beautiful part of the world. It is great. And, we have to do what we can to really show people the validity of what we can do up here. And brewing actually sits very comfortably, by doing that circle with the water. When we started the brewery, we were 100% a sheep farm. But when you're brewing, you're producing, you land up with spent grain. And sheep are wonderful creatures in many ways, mostly for their imagination of the different ways they can find to kill themselves during their short lives. So they are unbelievably stupid, in my personal opinion. So we started off then. We started with 3 Highland cattle. Because we were producing spent grain and cows eat grain, so we were feeding the spent grain to the cattle. I think we were up to about 80 cattle before we could actually persuade Mum that actually, we are going to have to start sending these off to the abattoir. We've got far too many cattle. We can't just use them for eating the grain. And then sort of in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, we've actually taken out the sheep and put in a deer farm because we were producing more spent grain than the number of cattle that we could sensibly keep was justifying. So we now run a mixed deer and cattle farm, which is, all taking the spent grain after we finish with the brewing process out, feeding it to the animals. So when we empty the mash tun, we empty it into the back of a Kubota and we drive it up the glen and we shovel it out, and the deer are following along behind you, helping themselves.
Assuming then that the growth in livestock, from what you've said there, has been as a direct consequence of the growth of the brewery and you wanting to essentially recycle the grains rather than just dispose of it.
Exactly. I would say it's more a sort of a, because, again, sheep have many wonderful qualities. They taste fantastic, but they don't eat spent grain. So, and I apologise to vegans who are listening. But yeah, so we've evolved the mix of the farm to cattle and deer because those that they will eat the spent grain. So yes, absolutely. It's all everything. It's a system. Everything has its place. It all sort of fits within its environment, and that's kind of what Fyne Ales is all about. We are absolutely intrinsically both a product of our environment, but also, again, you see this, like, if you're looking at managing land over long periods of time, you do see that things evolve in order to fit what we're doing, and I think the brewery and the farm have been part of that sort of long-term evolution.
So it feels like you're very much it's a symbiotic relationship between everything going on there, but you definitely personally see yourself almost as like custodians of the land.
Yeah, I think anyone that's farmers all do. Anyone that looks after land, anyone that farms, certainly from a family farm background, and I think that anyone would see themselves as that. That's just a fact of how the world is.
But obviously, farming, especially back in the day. I mean, because my parents grew up on farms, both of them, and we used to go back and visit, and I think they thought it would be fun for me and my brothers to help out, but I just think it was cheap labour. It is hard, especially then. It was hard work. I mean, this wasn't an easy job.
Yeah, no, very much. And look, I'll be honest. We were in a position where we always had farming partners in who actually did the hard graft of the farming. So I am not claiming that I had an idyllic childhood running around on tractors and getting the harvest in and stuff. That wasn't how things were. But it is. No, I mean there is no doubt that farming is tough, and making money out of farming up here in the west coast of Scotland is really tough. It might be different if you're running big arable farms in East Anglia or in Yorkshire. These can be big money-making organisations or businesses. But sheep farming up here on the west coast of Scotland is a really tough game. So I think there was genuinely a feeling that that. And as I said, it got to the stage where both us and pretty much everyone locally, we couldn't afford to run sheep on the hill anymore. So hence we couldn't employ the numbers of people that we did. So as that was going, and that would have been a process that run through decades. That wasn't like a sort of a decision like that. It was a process that just sort of incremental decisions over the years, over decades, had just vastly reduced the number of people involved. So yeah, it was very much looking for something different, a different way to bring vibrancy and energy into the local area. So, and that was kind of very much the genesis of where we came from.
It's a fascinating background, and I'm still picturing, because obviously, again, and forgive my geography, and I know that a couple of our Scottish listeners will probably hammer me for this, but obviously, if you're on the west coast of Scotland, even just like you say, getting to Aberdeen isn't a simple journey, is it?
No. I think it's yeah. I mean, Scotland is the distances are bigger. If you're used to the south of England. I mean, I remember, driving up from the south of England to here, and then going onwards to see friends at Skye. And when you get here, you're about halfway to the north of Skye. And what's nice about us, we're about an hour north of Glasgow, but in that hour, you absolutely go from the central belt into the Highlands. So just before you get to us, about 20 minutes away, there's a high pass you have to come over called the Rest and Be Thankful. And again, going back to my very long-suffering dray team, but with all the change in climate we've had over the last few years, we've seen landslide after landslide shutting that road. And when that road's shut, that adds an extra hour and 3/4 onto our trip into Glasgow. And what should become an hour and a quarter, what should be an hour and a quarter's journey, suddenly becomes a sort of 2.5, 3 hour journey to get down into Glasgow. So it's
it's madness. I tell you, it's madness where you are.
It's bloody lovely though. But it is. It's a mad place to try and run a business, but it's lovely.
If some of the pictures I've seen are anything to go by, it's an absolutely stunning environment to work in.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason. We have to tell the story. We're in a fantastic location. We are so privileged to be here. So we just actually have to sort of embrace that and all the challenges and the things which are difficult. But against that, we've got this brilliant location, the great stories to tell and everything to do as well. So we just have to take the rough with the smooth and try and work out how do we do the best we can with it.
Talking of great stories, I think that's a beautiful segue into the next beer that we're going to drink this evening, because we couldn't be doing a podcast with the owner of Fyne Ales without featuring Jarl. Jamie, I'm sure most people possibly know the story of this beer, but tell us all about Jarl, how it came about, and possibly also, I don't think it's remiss of me to say that how it maybe changed the brewery's life forever.
Jarl was interesting. I mentioned that my father died back in 2009, and at the stage back in 2009, we were still probably called ourselves a microbrewery. I always kind of felt like a microbrewery was defining yourself by the limit of your ambition. So I wasn't necessarily wildly keen on microbrewery as a term. But at the same time, we were all about cask beer. We had a lovely head brewer, Will Wood, who left us and went down to Laken's over in East Anglia. And Will was a really talented brewer, great palate, and really loved hops. He joined us actually from Oakham. So exactly. So
there you go.
There's part of the story straight away. So and we'd actually done Avalanche was our first beer that we brewed with American hops. Really taking American hops and applying them to a British cask beer. And I can't remember exactly which year we brewed Avalanche in, but if it wasn't 2008, it was 2007, but 2008, 2007. And so we'd kind of sort of put one foot on this sort of journey of playing with sort of new world ingredients, but within British cask beer. I think when I got involved in the business, we were trying to decide how do we go forward? Where do we take the business to? And I spent a bit of time, firstly just trying to understand what we were doing, which was interesting. Any small business, you've always got 17 forms of chaos going on, and also understanding what other people were doing around the place in the UK. And then went out to the States for the Craft Brewers Conference when it was in San Francisco, and spent a fantastic week talking to American brewers about what they were doing. And then spent another even better week sort of driving north from San Francisco, going to places like Lagunitas, to Russian River, to Anderson Valley, to Bear Republic. And just getting a chance to sit down with their brewers and have a nice chat with them about what was going on. And, this was 2010, when there was a lot. The American beer scene had come a long way, but it was still really before much of that, or just as that was starting to make an impact in the UK. And two things struck me talking to people over there. One was all those businesses, Sierra Nevada, they started like we'd started, in like a little 10-barrel kit in a small shed in a pretty remote location. And they built this phenomenally successful brand that had gone out there, and they'd really introduced lots of people to great beer. So that struck me as being a really positive thing. And then the other thing that really struck me was when you were talking to a lot of these American brewers, what reverence they held British cask beer in. And I think I understood quite clearly right from that stage onwards that actually what has Britain contributed to the world beer heritage, and it's cask beer, the ability to express subtle, nuanced flavours in relatively low ABV, sessionable beers, is kind of what Britain did better than anybody else. So I think coming back from that, what I wanted to do was to try and really focus on modern British beer, really great British beer. And probably, at that stage, I was quite a convert to the use of the term craft, but in a very all-encompassing term. Craft beer, to my mind, was the distinction between beer that was brewed for a group of people that would be passionate about it, whatever its format. I still don't really buy the whole sort of cask versus craft distinction. The point, to my mind, is about brewing beer that, if you try and brew a beer that appeals to the maximum number of people, you land up with standard lager, and that's the macro route. The craft route is about brewing beer that you'll find an audience for, people that will really enjoy what you drink. And so came back with this idea, okay, how do we brew modern British craft beers, take the best of what we're about here and apply over that the best of what the new world's got to teach us. And over the years, we've learned so much from people, brewers from other countries. For us, very much, the States and Italy have been the two legs of our international learning journey. So when we then heard John, the head brewer at Oakham, told us that he'd been over to Yakima and had discovered this fantastic hop Citra, and he was so excited about it he actually got some air freighted over from Yakima so he could get it straight into brew. We obviously hadn't been on that buying trip, but we were very happy. Well, if that's interesting, that's good. Let's speak to Ferrans and let's get an order in for a few brews worth to give it a go, see what this hop can do. And then we were then having our sort of next sort of annual beer festival was coming up, so we sort of held it back and used it for that. And back in those days, and still to a large degree now, our approach was, we'll try something. If people, we'll brew a beer we like. If people enjoy it, we'll brew more of it. If they don't like it, we'll try something different. As long as we like it, we'll put it out there to the market and see what people think about it, see what their reaction is. And what happened with the Jarl was it got a great reaction. We put it out, people loved it, they wanted to try it again. And so it rapidly, it went from being a one-off to being a 2, 3, 4-time brew to being part of the core range that we can't live without. So it's absolutely kind of evolved. Its evolution in the brewery has followed how much people have enjoyed drinking it. And so, and we're lucky. Lots of people have enjoyed drinking it, and that's been fantastic.
But that whole beer experience you had in the States back, in 2008, 2009, when you
2010, I think.
2010. I mean, I know that our listeners can't see, but surely, Jamie, you saw the look of sheer envy on the faces of Steve and myself as you name checked those breweries you went to in like 10 years ago plus. And me and Steve were going, "Oh, you're just talking about one of our fancy calls in the States there, going through some of those places."
Yeah.
Early beer journey discoveries for us, for sure.
Yeah, I was very, very lucky, and I was lucky to get an introduction to some really great brewers in those places, and they were very generous to give me some time and show me what they were doing. And it felt like the whole scene then, the scene in the UK was smaller. What was also interesting was the scene in America was so much smaller. That craft brewers conference, I go to the craft brewers conference every year, and now they book out some of the biggest conference centers in the States. But back then it was in a big hotel, but a hotel in San Francisco, and everyone kind of fitted in, and it felt like everyone knew everyone, and it was different times. It's kind of intriguing how much it's changed.
I mean, look at that. I mean, seriously. Jarl, I mean, this is still only a year or so in the can. So Steve and I had it in the can last year, I think.
Yeah, I think it'll be a year and a bit since I think we canned it pre-pandemic actually. So I'm guessing it must be coming up for 2 years since we started canning it.
I mean, it's translated astonishingly well, in my opinion, considering that most people's love of Jarl is probably the cask version.
Absolutely. And I think that's also getting sort of when we moved it to can. So we've always done Jarl in 500ml bottles. Almost probably the second year of brewing Jarl for cask, we did it to 500ml bottles, and that's been great. And generally with our bottled beers, our approach has been whatever our cask beer recipe is, we put exactly the same into bottles. But when we decided that this came out for Jarl's 10th birthday.
There was you, Ghost Ship, and Oakham Citra in that same sort of period all released your Citra-based beers, didn't you?
Exactly. But anyway, so with the cans, we wanted to bring what you get with either a can or a bottle serve is, and to a degree a keg serve as well, is you're getting a colder, more carbonated serve compared with cask beer, and to a degree that drop in temperature is suppressing some of the aromas that you'll get out of cask, and that's why cask beer is a brilliant way of expressing flavour at relatively low ABVs, and at the same time, that colder, more carbonated serve has quite a different mouthfeel. So actually, for the can, we have sort of tweaked the recipe compared with cask. So we've actually added in some oats, which give it a sort of a little bit more body to the mouthfeel, trying to mimic the cask mouthfeel. We'll not mimic, but to get closer to that sort of cask mouthfeel actually in the can. And then we've added an extra dry hop, again, in order to give it a little bit more aroma boomph to marry up against that colder serve. So we're aiming for the same flavour point in the glass, but actually our route of getting there is different because the route by which we present it to the drinker is different. So we're actually trying to get the flavour to be the same, even though the route by which we get the beer there is slightly different.
The beer, it's an iconic beer. No matter which way you look at it, it really is, and it's one that I think, certainly from my point of view, was the first time that I came across Fyne Ales was as a result of Jarl, and obviously as Martin alluded to, it did come out in that sort of 18-month, 2-year period where you had Oakham Citra, and then you had Jarl, and then you had Adnams Ghost Ship, who were all showcasing what was at the time this brand new American hop that had all these fantastic flavours in that we've never tasted anything like it before, and that's obviously continued to be a staple in Jarl, hasn't it? The Citra hop. But that must come with its challenges as well, because we know that hop varieties will change from year to year dependent on what's been happening with the weather and how they've been harvested. So I suppose there's two questions here. Is firstly, what's your sort of relationship like in terms of with hop merchants, in terms of making sure you get the best possible Citra product to put into this beer, and secondly, how do you then counterbalance any of those variations that you see from year to year to make sure that essentially what you get in the glass is the same thing over and over again?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. One of the things we like about we do a lot of new beers, but actually, in a brewing sense, consistency is actually a very interesting challenge. Is how do you actually really produce the same product? And so, the fact is that, and I think it's quite easy to forget, beer is not an industrial product. Our raw materials are agricultural. And so as seasons change, both on the malt side and the hop side, you will get quite different characteristics coming through from your raw materials. We're very lucky. We've always had a brilliant relationship with Charles Fairham, who are one of the who are great hop merchants in the UK. There's now perhaps rather more than there were back in the day. But we've always had a really good relationship with them. And what's been nice is that we've been lucky enough to be able to go with them over to Yakima each year, sort of pre-pandemic, and actually meet the growers. And again, I think that's what I found really striking the couple of times I've done that, is how much the growers appreciate that, because they're growing hops, and and like 10, 15 years ago, they never kind of saw the brewers. So that wasn't people weren't that interested in what the hop growers were doing. They were just buying the hops. Whereas now it's this real pilgrimage during harvest time. All the brewers are there. Everyone's out there talking to them. And what you really see when you're talking to the growers is you get real differences between fields at one end of Yakima Valley to the other end of Yakima Valley. The way the growers, the amount of irrigation water each different brewer's been able to get. I mean, Yakima Valley is basically a desert. All the hops are grown with snow melt from the glaciers and the snow up on I think it's the Cascade Mountains above Yakima. So, and each different farm has different water rights, therefore has the ability to get access to different amounts of water, and all of these things affect the hops. And then the drying systems that the hop growers have got in, and really what other hops they've got planted. So what their picking window is for each hop makes a heck of a difference as well. So what's been lovely working with Charles Fairham particularly is that we've been able to go out to Yakima and actually meet the different growers. And now we now work a bit with YCH, who actually own the Citra variety. And we've been able to actually go out, meet the growers, understand really what's driving their life, what makes their world work or not work, what's been difficult or good for them each year. But particularly, it means we can actually go out, we can rub samples from all the different growers, and we can actually decide which grower that year, and then we buy our whole usage for the whole year from that one grower. So hopefully, year on year, it gives us the ability to each year find something that for us is true to style classic Citra, the Citra that we want for Jarl. And so each year buy our whole year's requirement from that one grower, which is absolutely fantastic.
And you're being literal there, aren't you? When you're saying about rubbing the hops, you're literally talking about rubbing the hop plants and smelling what that aroma is like.
Well, I'd say it can get almost, though there's a lovely grower in Yakima. They are the most wonderful, welcoming family when you go and visit them. But it's almost, I mean, it's not their front room. It's very much, they have a sample room. But you do feel slightly terrible. You arrive, they've got samples in sort of, because so hops, when they come off when the hops get harvested, again, it's a beautiful thing. You see all these amazing old Dodge pickup trucks that have been driving through the hops for years, and they've kind of got this amazing patina where the paintwork's been scraped off by the hops over the course of 20 years' life. But so they'll cut all the hops off, and they'll take them back to these amazing picking drying stations, which range from the incredibly modern German, totally automated systems to some growers that operate these amazing traditional wooden shaking systems that you really feel like you're in something that somewhere, I don't know, Richard Scarry meets Professor Brainstorm. It's like crazy automation. And anyway, so you've got to get the flowers or the rhizomes off of the hops, and then you've got to get them fed into a dryer. So by the time you're actually sampling it, they've been picked, they've been dried, and they're through into the sample room. But then it feels so strange. You're there sort of rubbing the hops. You get them in your hands, give them a really good rub between your hands, and then you get a good big faceful of them to sort of see what they taste like. And it does feel horribly like you are marking somebody's homework in front of them, their wife, their children, and everyone else has been working on the farm all year. And this is kind of their output. And there you are as a bunch of visiting brewers saying, yeah, we like that one, but not quite so much as we like this one. You're trying to find ways of not saying, actually, that one's just a dog. Like, I pity the poor bugger that's going to land up brewing with that batch of hops. Because every batch of hops will get brewed with by somebody. But what's interesting, every by and large, everything's going to find its place out there in the market. A lot of the stuff that really, if something's really not smelling that great, it's going to go for extract, and it's the big brewers are just going to get the alpha acid, which is all they want, and they're going to drop like milliliters of it into every pint of standard lager. Whereas brewers like us, we want everything. We want the whole flower.
Do you have to? Is there a certain time of year? I mean, is there a certain period in that harvest time when you choose to go with Charles Farren? Because if the harvesting takes 5 to 6 weeks, I'm guessing you're not there for the full 5 to 6 weeks.
No, we're Charles Farren. They as do many of the other hop growers. They organise a visit for sort of late on in the harvest program. Because as I said, by the time you're rubbing them and sampling them, it needs to be, and so it will go through the picker and dryer the day that it's harvested, and there isn't any field of hops that's not going to get harvested. Everything's coming down. It's all going to get harvested. It's all going through the dryers. So you're talking about where it goes to. So basically, you want to be there kind of like week 4 or 5 of the harvest, because that way there'll be enough that'll be through and into the sample rooms that you can actually get a flavour for what's gone on in that harvest. So you need to be there relatively late on in the harvest. I've got a friend, Wayne, who founded Cigar City, and they're now part of a much bigger group. He'll basically spend the whole harvest up in Yakima, because he's buying so much Simcoe that he kind of needs to be there right the way through. And the guys from Sierra Nevada are on site, and they're actually telling they're working with the farmers, but really to a pretty high degree, telling them, right, that field's ready. I want that picked now. And if you've got Sierra Nevada's firepower, it's kind of like, okay, drop everything else. That's the field that we're harvesting, and we'll bring those 2, 3, 4, 5 hop yards in. Field is Scottish terminology. Hop yards are what they would call them. So yeah, there's absolutely different. You've got to understand your place in the pecking order, and how do you navigate that to your best success. But it's far from easy.
That must be a tough one when you're on somebody's home turf working with some of the biggest names in beer. To say, well, actually, no, we'd quite like some of that, Phil.
Well, I think the reality is we're never going to be offered any.
Yeah, there's
we're
no
never
chance, is there? Yeah,
that wasn't one of the samples that ever made the table when we were there. So it's fascinating. But for me, coming from the agricultural background, what was really good was you're really seeing farmers preparing their product, doing their bit of the supply chain as well as they possibly can, and that's great. We are, as I said, we're starting with agricultural products, hops and malt, and we've got to then take those and produce the best beers we can out of them.
And as you say, that must be quite fascinating for you as a. I'm going to use the term loosely, maybe as a farmer or as an owner of a farm business to go to another farm business and to see those similarities in terms of what you're doing in Scotland with your business and how they're dealing with a business that's purely producing the product that you need to make your beers taste
absolutely
really good.
Yeah, no, it is. They operate on a scale out there which is just huge. The first time I went, I was with a UK hop farm. We were talking it through. The first place that we went to, they had 4,000 acres of hop yards. That I think was slightly larger than the entire UK hop. That was just one farm, and mind blown. It was when they put in a sort of a picking drying shed, they're investing 20, 30, 40 million dollars in a picking drying shed. It's like we don't have a shed that expensive for looking after our deer. I can assure you of that much. So
I mean, scale again, which we've talked about a few times tonight, but that backstory, that information, and also presumably you don't have to go with Charles Fareham. I mean, you could rely on other people. You could rely on them as the hop importers.
Absolutely.
Does this sort of tell us just how much you value not just Jarl, but everything that you produce from the farm?
Because what we're trying to do is to produce the best possible examples of what we can do, and it's a big investment. I mean, now it's our head brewer that goes, and that's like 10 days worth of his time. It's flights, it's hotels. It's a chunky investment you've got to put into place in terms of doing it. But if you really want to do it well, to make the best possible examples you can of the beers that you're trying to produce, you've got to work with your raw ingredients. You've got to really care about where your materials are coming from. So for us, yes, it's going a little bit further, but it's also what you need to do to produce the best you possibly can.
Well, all I can say is that didn't slow me down drinking it. None of that information.
Excellent.
I basically, while you chatted away for like 10 minutes plus, I've just downed that 440 milliliter can of Jarl. And I think it has, I said it at the start, I think it's translated so well into the can as well, which I think is just, like I said, for the amount of love that it would have had for cask.
Yeah.
And again, referencing a conversation recently we had with Adidar about moonshine, then there must have been an element of nervousness about can we nail the canned version.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think I always have canned Jarl in my fridge. It's the product that I want. So I'm happy with it because I wanted to express as close to cask as we could get it in a format which is easier for me and anyone else that chooses to have in their fridge. So,
Jamie, I'm surprised you don't just have a direct line into your home of fresh Jarl, because believe me, if I owned a brewery, that is exactly what I'd have. Of my flagship beer, I would have a constant supply of the freshest possible version of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like variety in my drinking, so I like to drink lots of other people's beers too. But yes, my desk is it's at least 7 meters away from a permanent cask tap of Jarl. So
okay, so not a million miles to go.
No, my desk is absolutely fine. The fridge at home is maybe a little bit further.
Well, as I said, we finished the Jarl, and eagle-eared listeners may have heard that we've cracked Fyne Ales open. which is a bit of an anniversary special, isn't it, Jamie?
Yeah, so I think with sort of 20 years coming up, and as I said, we have this sort of very long-term view as to what we're trying to achieve with the brewery. And we'd never done a barley wine before. But we have done quite a lot of barrel-aged products of one sort and another. So we really thought we would try a barrel-aged barley wine. So we bought a selection of casks in order to try what the results would be. I have to say we did get slightly caught by sort of the run into the pandemic, so we were a little bit later going into them than we wanted to. And when we got them through the end, what we decided to do was actually the blend of the three was what really worked best for us. So this is a really nice. It's it's come up as sort of an 8.2%. Actually, sorry, I was going to pour myself some and stop the yabbering. 8.2% barley wine, given the best part of a year in those three casks, and really it should be a beer which should age really well. I'm going to put some of this away for our 30th birthday because I hope it'll stand up and be good in 10 years' time.
We need to dive into this one now because the aroma smells amazing.
Oh, does it ever?
So cheers, and thank you very much, Jamie.
Cheers.
Good health.
Where's the booze?
There it is. Oh, there's a bit of warmth right at the back there.
Yeah, but it's still quite subtle. But the nose, I was getting like this sort of woody and chocolatey kind of notes coming off it. It's a very dark, well, maybe in my light, it's quite a dark barley wine. I think there is definitely a bit of that Madeira. Sherry I'm not getting quite so much of because it's not necessarily my favourite. Definitely I'm getting the Madeira coming through. It is very smooth to drink.
I think age, what I'm really learning is that time is a wonderful thing, and I think that I don't think we use it enough in brewing. We could all be a bit, and I get the point. Beer is cheese, not wine. By and large, it should be drunk fresh. But actually, there are some beers, and I find very much the same with our sort of classic imperial stout, Mills and Hills. Actually, 2, 3, 4, 5 years really improves that beer. And I'm a great fan of taking time to let things mellow out and smooth out and come together nicely. And I think that mellowness and smoothness comes from giving it enough time in barrel that the flavours marry together and then just mellow out. And you don't get anything that's too harsh in any one direction. And I think that's why I think it'll get better over time, I think.
I mean, I'm already fascinated to know what that could be like in the future. I suppose the thing with time is that, for any business, time is money, literally.
Absolutely.
Because it's sitting there, it's making you absolutely nothing, and it's taking up space.
Yep.
So, I understand completely what you're saying. And even if I think about some of the really good lager brewers in this country and others who actually store their lager for way longer than the macro brewers, but because they know that they want that to be the best product they can produce. And something that I've got a sense of tonight when we've been talking is definitely something that Fyne Ales want to do, is just be the best example of that beer style that we can do.
Absolutely that. And no one thinks that we're going to be selling thousands of hectoliters of barley wine every year. I think time's really important, and that's a little bit, particularly with our Origin series, which I know you've had on the show before. But it's all about giving things the right amount of time, we do need to find space. Our problem is we've got lots of farm space, but converting space the animals live in to space that you can actually store some barrels in is a horribly expensive proposition. So we are constantly short of space. But nevertheless, I think it's really important where you can to give things the right amount of time. And particularly, with the Origin stuff, which we're moving to be a sort of a purely spontaneous project, they are talking about blending to 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old product. you've got to have enough of it coming through to build up enough of a barrel store that you've actually got product which will tell the story in more than tiny quantities. So yeah, time is really key, I think, on some of these products.
I think it's really interesting that you're talking about the Origin series in particular and the time that those beers need. What was the decision behind adding that to the portfolio, so to speak? Because I'm guessing up until that point you were producing, a solid core range. Jarl had become this immensely popular beer. What, did someone get bored and go, oh, let's add something else to the portfolio as well?
Yeah, I think I probably do get bored quite eeasily.
So it was you. It was all down to you, Jamie, was it?
No, I think that one probably was. I said, what we're trying to do with Fyne Ales, all of our clean beers, and I think the theme that ties all of our clean beers together, by clean I mean everything outside the Origins range, is about trying to sort of take the best of the British brewing tradition and overlay that with new world ideas. So back in 2014, we spent sort of the best part of £3 million building our new brewery, and that was really hard engineered to be a classic British style brew house. But every decision about how do we produce the best quality beer, put the money behind anything that will make it improve the quality of the beer that's coming out of that plant. So with all the clean program, we had that very clean vision about sort of modern British beer and trying to marry up over this thing. But at the same time, right, going back to that sort of trip back, again, I'm slightly confused, 2009, 2010, in the States. I remember going to sort of Russian River and drinking supplication and consecration. And that, I hadn't really been exposed to a lot of Belgian beer. And it was just like, wow, okay, that's just something totally different. But then talking to the guys from Jester King about how, and Ron Adner is a wonderful guy, and talking to him about how at Jester King, they were really trying to tell a story of place in the beer. And thinking that actually, what we're all about at Fyne Ales is we're about where we're from. So we kind of had the opportunity when we built the new brewery, which is an old sheep shed. We had the original brewery, which is an old dairy that is now firmly separate. And, Malk, our head brewer, was always, yes, we can brew with Brett, as long as it's the other side of that large granite mountain just beside the brewery. But when we could put the two breweries in two separate buildings, it was like, well, okay, now we can play more on the small brewery. We'll take all the clean beers out of the small brewery, and that's where we will play with Brett and with time, and really try and tell stories of place and what it means to be a brewer in Argyll right now at this point in time. And that was really what Origins is all about. So it took a long time. The original sort of concepts for Origins really came back in 2012, 2013. But we couldn't do anything with them until we built the new brewery. And then even when we built the new brewery, we were still using the small brewery for clean beers, for specials and stuff. So we were still being quite cautious. And so it was only really as our volumes got to a stage where we could actually take the small brewery and dedicate it to a wild beer program that we actually really got the space to sort of evolve and grow that. And then, these beers take up to 3 years to come through. So it takes a long time between starting out on that journey and where you get to eventually. So so it's kind of like a passion project. I don't expect Origins to ever make us any money particularly, but what I want it to do is to be able to tell the story about brewing beer in Argyll in 2021, what it means right now in a different way, actually through in the glass in a way that perhaps the Clean Beer program, it tells the story in a different way to the way the Clean Beer program does.
I think the thing with Origins that stands out for me is that it's again the name is really, really true to what it's doing, because it is using all of the natural environment that you find around the brewery, isn't it? So it's using ingredients that you're foraging from the local fields. It's using the natural beasties that are in the air that are getting into that beer, and they're doing their thing, and they're making it taste as it does. And those cultures will be truly unique to Fyne Ales, won't they? That's not something that can be replicated anywhere else in the world, because only you are brewing in that environment.
Absolutely. No, that's it. I mean, it's a product of our place, but also what we're doing with the origins. Okay, for the first sort of 4 to 6 months, which is like the Saccharomyces fermentation, we keep them in a sort of temperature-controlled cellar. But then after that, they're just going outside into the natural environment. So if we have a hot summer, this summer was a pretty decent summer in Argyll, it'll give us one flavour profile. If we have a cold winter, it'll do something else to the beers. So they're also absolutely a product of their time. Each evolution of the beer, each year's production, will reflect the climate in Argyll during the time that beer spent in the barrel. So it's designed very much looking for time and place. Tell the story with both.
Yeah, we've been. I mean, personally, I've definitely been impressed with them, and I think there's been a few, for me and Steve, a few divisive ones every now and again as well. But I also feel like that's probably what you were trying to do, is you're making beer to challenge people as well as represent the area you're in.
Yeah, no, I think it's nothing should ever be in a bottle unless, as a team here, we're happy that that's something that we're happy to go out and we think represents and tells the story. There is an element of, as a team, we're learning and evolving. We are, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. The people like the Cantillons, the Dréfontaines, they have really mastered this. They can produce a beautiful, elegant product year on year and do it brilliantly. We're trying to learn and adapt to how do we do that within our environment and actually tell meaningful stories that work. So yeah, absolutely. I think some things will divide the crowd very, very much. But as I said at the beginning, I don't think that craft beer, you're ever trying to produce beer which will appeal to everybody. Because if you want a beer that appeals to everybody, well, there's 100 years of brewing history that tells you that standard lager. So that's not our goal. Our goal is to produce beers that a group of people will really enjoy and get into. And that's what I hope we're achieving with Origins. But absolutely, it's still early days. It's still very evolutionary. And I'll probably still be saying it's early days in another 5 years' time, because that project really happens on a slow clock speed. So it takes time for the iterations to come through. But yeah, be assured, everything that goes out of here is something that, as a team, we've said, yep, that's valid. That deserves to go into bottle. We should take that one through and finish it. And yeah, we've even had stuff that's gone into bottle and it's evolved in a way we don't like it in bottle. And it's like, well, okay, it's still not going out the door. So everything that goes out the door is a beer that we think tells the story that we're trying to tell with it. Whether that'll appeal to any individual's palate, that stands down to the individual drinker. But
yeah,
we're doing our best to tell the story.
Yeah, and that's what me and Steve said before. We have different palates, and especially when it comes to maybe mixed firm and foraged beers, that's probably where me and Steve will diverge the most on our beer conversations and our respective beer journeys. But the thing is, while we're sipping this, and it'd be really remiss of us not to talk about this, given the whole thing about provenance, place, location, Fyne Fest. Now, a lot of the pictures which we've seen and Steve referred to earlier are definitely around the Fyne Fest. And the pictures always, it looks wonderful. Why did you start Fyne Fest, and how much are you looking forward to it happening again?
Yeah, no, Fyne Fest was really, I said earlier, we're lucky. We're in a beautiful part of the world. It's a great place to visit. And it really came to myself and my brother to a degree. The two of us sort of talking about what kind of did we enjoy most about growing up here as kids. And it was kind of those days when you had loads of friends over, barbecues and good beer, sitting back and enjoying the place. And it was like, okay, let's just do that on a bigger scale. And let's kind of put the festival back into Beer Festival. Back in 2009, an awful lot of the beer festival scene was, Canberra beer festivals, which are great, but happening in town halls under strip lights with plastic chairs and tables. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's nice. I get to taste lots of beers. But actually, for me, beers is sort of belongs at the middle of the table, surrounded by friends, having a good time. And, what makes a good time? Beer, good food, good music, good bunch of friends. And that's what we're trying to do with Fyne Fest, is give you the environment where you can put those ingredients together in a fantastic setting and you can have a good time.
So when was the first was Fyne Fest the first Fyne Fest, or did you just do a festival and everyone seemed to really love it and you carried on?
It was very much the first. It was always intended as the first of a series. It was in 2009, the same year, and I think Dad died in May, and we decided. And actually, we had a really good wake for Dad afterwards. And we thought, let's do that again, but we'll do it for the public. So we got the same marquee.
Fair enough.
We got the same marquee bar back, and he's like, let's put a marquee into the courtyard. The brewery here is in a sort of an old traditional courtyard, and we thought, let's put the same marquee into the courtyard. We've got friends who play some great music. We'll get them to come over and play some stuff. We'll get beer up from a lot of our friends, other breweries around the UK. I remember right from the get-go, we had beer from Oakham, from Thornbridge.
You've got me there already. I mean, seriously.
Yeah. So it was a nice lineup of beer. And we've got beautiful locations. So we said to people, if you want to camp, we'll open the gate to the field and you can go and camp in the field. And it's sort of worked. But I remember that very first Fyne Fest. There was a point in the evening, about sort of 8 o'clock in the evening, and it was just getting a little bit dicey. Is there going to be enough energy to keep this party going? And a busload of about 15 people came in from Arica, which was a nearby village, and they just provided that extra impetus, which just meant it was all work and everyone had a great time, and it was really good. And it really did work well. But it was on we probably had 200 people.
And the last one, which I presume I can't remember, you didn't do one this year in the end, did you?
No, we couldn't. It was just too soon. So the last one was 2019, and we were up to just shy of 3,000. Which
I mean, even with your space and land, there must be, given where you are, a lot of people must be staying.
Almost everybody. So everyone either stays or they stay in one of the local towns and villages, and we run shuttle buses to and fro. So almost everybody either camps or huge growth in the number of camper vans. We also have yurts for people that want their glamping option. So if you want to arrive to a nicely put up yurt with bed and linen and stuff, that we can do all of that as well. So yeah, pretty much everybody camps. I would say the sort of I can't remember the numbers, but it's something like it's well over 90% of people camp for the weekend. And we put on 250 of the best beers we can find from around the UK and a couple of international bars. Generally, an Italian bar, and what we've always tried to do with our bars is have them curated our import bars. Is rather than buying from a particular brewery, what we want is someone to create a selection from that country. So Mackie, which is a lovely bar in Rome, have been very generous and curated an Italian selection for us in a number of years. And in 2019, we had Shelton Brothers from the States created a brilliant selection of American beers for us. And at the same time, we'll put on cider and cocktails, all of that stuff. And then we'll have a couple of music stages. And, it's not big name bands, but it's like good Scottish bands, people that are sort of breaking through at the moment in Edinburgh, Glasgow, but are really going to stuff you can really dance to. And, and we hope the dance floor generally attests. We can see a couple of thousand people up and dancing. We put live music on to midnight, and then we'll put a DJs on to 2 a.m. So you can burn off as much energy as you like on the dance floor. And then, during the day, so we have got, if you want to go up and do some yoga, you can get up and do some yoga. We do a walker's bar up at a fallen down bothy, which is about an hour and a bit's walk up the glen. So if you want to get some exercise, or if you've got dogs with you, lots of people come with their dogs, so you can walk an hour or so up the glen, have some beers sitting beside the river, if you're foolish enough, you can go for a swim, but we don't encourage it. But and then we do pub quizzes. We try, basically it's a weekend of beer, but beer, food, music, and friends. It's different to anything else that's out there, but it's good fun.
It always sounds fantastic. But there's one thing I want to pick up on, and you mentioned it before. Where's the love of the Italian beer scene stem from?
I think it stems from the fact that I don't know. We were working in Italy beforehand. We have a very nice Italian importer, and I never really wanted to export beer very much, but these guys came over. They visited us. They told us they'd look after us well. So we started working with them, and that started getting us some friends over there. And then we also employed a really lovely Italian brewer. He came to us to wash casks for 3 months and stayed for 5 years. And so
he couldn't get out of Argyll. It's miles away from anywhere.
Exactly that. Yeah. So he introduced us to people as well. But what I love about the Italian beer scene, I always think the American beer scene, it's about taking all of that technology and science and control that the big guys use to produce an absolutely consistent, pretty bland, tasteless product, but absolutely perfect consistency. And the American craft brewers take that approach, and how do we apply it to produce the best beers we possibly can? So it's all about the science, the process control, the technology. The approach in Italy, though, is much more one of the gastronomy, like being a chef. And it's like, I always remember the people of a certain age will do, the Cannonball Run, the movie where it's like, he's like saying Italian driving, and he tears the rear view wing mirror off and throws it behind him. And it's like, what behind me doesn't matter. And it's that sort of sense that actually, if it worked and it tastes great, do it again. Why did it work? It doesn't matter quite so much as the fact that it really did and it really tasted great. So I think the Italian beer brewing scene brings this very different perspective, which is much more from like a chef kind of an angle, about the understanding of flavors and putting flavors together. And I think that's a really interesting addition to the approach of the American scene, where you're taking the process control and the science to how do you deliver the best flavors. So yeah, I like both traditions. I think both have got something interesting to teach us. So you can learn from them, and there's also, you can meet lots of lovely people in Italy and go to lovely beer festivals and hang out in great places. So it's a good place to go to.
Well, other than bringing back Fyne Fest again, so that you can have more of those wonderful experiences of people coming together, what is next for Fyne Ales? You've been doing this for 20 years now. You're a quite significant milestone in the brewery's history. What's in the future? Is there anything that you're planning in the short long term? I mean, obviously in the short term we're celebrating 20 years of Fyne Ales. Yeah.
Yes, exactly that. No, it's interesting. I think the goal with Fyne Ales is we're trying to build a business for the long term. So we're not trying to sort of rush at any gates. We're not trying to meet any particular deadline, anything where we get to. But when we built the new brewery, the brew house and everything that we put in, sort of the core infrastructure of the new brewery, is sized for a much bigger business than where we are now. So what we're really hoping to do is, over the course of the next 10, 15, 20 years, to really steadily build out our brand and get more people introduced to what we're all about, tell our story to more places around the country, and get people infused and engaged with what we're all about as a business. So so that's very much one part of it. And I think it's one of those things, when I'm looking back and I'm like saying, like, the family's had the farm here for like this sort of 120 years. Ideally, in the happiest of all possible worlds, Fyne Ales will still be here, knocking out great, modern and relevant beers for that point in time in another 20, 30, 40 years' time. So we're trying to put down the solid foundations and build forward in a way that people can actually buy into that. And hopefully we will still be introducing new people to the Fyne Ales story in another 20 years' time who are discovering what we're all about, and what we're also doing will still be fresh and relevant in another 20 years' time. It'll be different, I'm quite sure, but how it'll be different, how it will evolve, and hopefully it'll be true to our story. So we'll see how that goes. And I think so I think the beers, we are fundamentally, we are all about sort of a modern take on British brewing tradition. And so hopefully, although I have no idea what beers we'll be brewing in 20 years' time, I hope they will always be building on and respecting how do we actually brew beers that really truly reflect the British brewing tradition, but pick up on the best ideas from around the world and tie those into that tradition. Last thing I was going to say, our other big push is that, as we build out, we're starting now to really put pen to paper on planning the next phase of our expansion. We've got to hit net zero. We've already, before we built the new brewery, we planted thousands of trees. Just literally all the ground above the hill is a brand new broadleaf plantation, which will be there for the next sort of 50, 100 years. I've got consultants looking at sort of peat restoration on the hill above where we take the water supply from. But that's kind of like, the hill's the hill, the brewery's the brewery. So I still want to see how do we actually take the actual brewing operations. It's not good enough to put the carbon dioxide into the air and take it out through the trees and the peatland restoration. We've actually got to work out how do we stop putting the CO2 into the air. So we're also, as part of that, I really want to work out how do we do our bit and actually get the brewing operation within itself to net zero as well. I think we all have to do that. So that's, we don't have any choice. Let's get on. Let's do it. It needs doing.
And other than the anniversary ale, which is now available, are there any other celebrations planned, small, large, within particular restrictions at the moment for the 20th anniversary?
Yeah, I think given the sort of fairly disparate nature, the fact we have sort of customers, really people who enjoy our beer, we're lucky to say, up and down the country. We've not planned a big party. Obviously Fyne Fest this year would have been part of that. But as we haven't done Fyne Fest, we haven't planned a big party. But, so we're continuing to sort of try and put out the things. I think I'm allowed to say, Iain hasn't told me that I'm not going to. I'm not allowed to, so I'm going to say anyway. But we have got a fresh hop version of Jarl coming out. So we're actually getting some.
Sorry, what?
Yeah, what was that?
So we're getting some fresh Citra. And okay, given what I was just saying about environmental, this is not environmentally friendly. It is a one-off, but I think it's interesting to tell the story. Because, it's great when you're out in the hop yards and you're rubbing the hops; they smell great. When they come through the dryer, it's something different. So what we wanted to try doing was a fresh hop version of Jarl. So somewhere in an air freight system, or I'm not sure if it's air freight. I think it actually goes on a reefer. We have a bunch of frozen Citra, which is currently wending its way through the horrendous supply chains and everything at the moment to us. And all being well, and obviously if we're totally happy with the quality of the beer, but there should be a fresh hop version of Jarl coming out. It was meant to be about now, but I think now it's still on a boat in a port. Who knows? It's somewhere.
It's beside a load of toys in Felixstowe. That's the problem.
Exactly. It has not yet managed to make its way into a warehouse that people can actually tell us when we're going to see it. So, but yeah, so sometime in December we should have a fresh hop version of Jarl coming out, and I think again that's another way of sort of bookending and telling our story. We're 20 years old. Here's a different version of Jarl. I'll be really interested to see how it comes out. Fresh hop beers are an interesting challenge. You've got to get the balance right with them. But what I hope, one of the things that makes us different, we haven't really talked about, is on the brewing side is we have a full-size hop back, so we're very good at working with whole leaf hops. That's again part of our essence of being about modern British beer, was to stay with whole leaf hops in the brew house. So I think that's going to really help us to get the absolute best out of these hops. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what that one's going to be like. That's going to be really interesting. I hope going to tell a good story.
You and just about every 1,000 of our listeners or so are all now clamouring for when they can get hold of fresh hopped Jarl.
It's going to be cask only, guys. So you've got to find yourselves a good cask.
Oh, for goodness sake! Do you know how difficult that is to get down in Essex?
We know a place.
With the right pub.
we know a place, Martin.
Yes, that place had better sort it, Rich.
Yeah. Jamie, it has been absolutely fascinating chatting with you this evening, learning about the history of Fyne Ales beyond just what you do with beer in terms of everything that you've done with farming, everything you're doing with the environment as well. It's an incredible story, and I think it's one that is... I'm going to put my neck out and say it's fairly unique to Fyne Ales. I don't think I can think of another British brewery that has a story quite like yours, because when you've got it on your labels that you are a farm brewery, and that is exactly what you are. That's not just that's not a style that you're trying to create and trying to add to your beers. You are a brewery that's based on a farm. That is a fact. You cannot argue with that. And you've constantly used the environment that's around you to grow and continue to have great success with everything you're doing. And long may that continue. This barley wine is really good, and it really does sum up everything I think about what Fyne Ales are about in terms of your approach to beer and just getting the greatest product out there.
Thank you very much for having me on, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be drinking with you. And I hope that the barley wine you really enjoy, because I've been really proud of it.
Thank you ever so much, Jamie, for arranging these beers to come through to us. As Steve said, thank you ever so much for joining us on the show.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Thanks so much, guys. Cheers.